Hi everyone, I wanted to at least do these periodically in order to get us a good understanding of what we're supposed to be doing, where we're at, make some sort of like verbal context of some of the stuff that's going on versus some of the stuff we're covering in class. I know we've covered culture and we've covered a little bit, I've opened up some more folders, but I do want to talk a little bit about what's happening. I think it's important to think about this material in the context of the lives in which we live in. I think it makes it easier to think about the world and think about the work that you're doing for this class when you can think about it as it connects with the things around us. At least that's my hope. Now, first, a key thing to understand is to remember that we're talking about sociology. And so what it means is this, is that, yes, I have my opinion as to how to understand what is happening right now. The protests, the riots, on top of it, the issue of the pandemic, all these things coming together and how they affect the world that we live in. I think that they're opinions that I have. I think in many cases, because I am a sociologist, and my opinion is typically based on my understanding of the world from a sociological perspective. I mentioned last time how I see the world sociologically. I can't separate that. That framing is a part of my being. That is, I've spent 25 years doing this work, and so it's very hard to not make those connections. I place it within a theoretical frame, a historical construct, and of course understand it from that particular framing, from that lens, if you remember talking about lens, from that lens. And it's important to understand that that makes it very different from, for example, what most people do, which is just kind of look at things and just say things that fit within whatever their feelings are. I think it's important to try and take a step back. This is my way of thinking about this from a sociological perspective. Take a step back. And as you take a step back, right, try to remove the emotions out of these things. Just take a moment and try to remove the emotions out of these things. It's impossible 100%. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you want to do the best you can, right? Just put them on the side for the moment and then start to think about what is going on and what is happening and trying to see the pieces that are there and try to see how they are related to each other. These things don't occur in vacuum. Anger does not happen simply because, someone just flips a switch and says, I'm angry. That isn't how it happens. And when we look at what is happening out there in a historical context, we could see the issues that make up these things. Whether you agree with what's happening or not, this is the part where you have to take a step back. It isn't about agreeing with it. It's about understanding it. And so, again, from a sociologist's perspective, that doesn't mean that you sit there and it's about understanding it. Understanding it means that at a minimum you could start thinking about how to address these issues as issues that occur within our society. Do you see the kind of difference? It doesn't remove the outrage, the anger, some of the issues that I myself feel about these things. What it does, though, is that, again, simply from a sociological perspective, it gives you an opportunity to think about how and why, and then consider how you can be addressing these issues. Meaning so that things don't happen the way they do, so that you can try and address these things. And of course, remember that just saying things like, well, a right doesn't make a wrong doesn't make a right, two rights make a... None of that is significant. None of that helps to understanding things from a sociological perspective. None of that helps to trying to think about solutions, at least from a sociological perspective. It just doesn't work that easily, right? Life is not that simple. This is what Remember, applying the sociological imagination is really understanding that part of it, you know. It's understanding how life is so complicated and becoming so complicated, and understanding how those issues affect our troubles, but of course, knowing that our trouble has source within the society, right? Understanding our place within that society. That's important because it makes us connected to the universe around us. And the more complicated society is, the harder it is to do that. I wanted to put up the issues of values, and which is one of the things that you guys have already picked up on, or if you haven't, you should be. Particularly the idea of the 10 values. 10? Sorry, they're more than 10, but these are the general values that we have up here. The kind of 15 that are up there, and the notion of how they work together, they contradict each other, they cluster together sometimes. These notions of our values are very foundation of, you know, particularly American society, right? Society in the United States, and its ideals that we try to live to. Right. Now, we don't know. Some of these things don't make any sense. Some of these things are not very specific. But the ideals of them are still something that we hold true. What do I mean? Take the simplest one. Let's look at democracy. What do I mean by democracy? Well, everyone has a vote. Well, does everyone really have a vote? Do you have a direct vote in deciding a particular law? No, you have a representative democracy. Even then, right, we don't have a pure representative democracy. The democracy we have, it depends on location and places. And, of course, there's all these other factors that, you know, so, for example, gerrymandering, right, where they kind of shift the representation. So you don't have, you know, a real democracy. You have a kind of this kind of connected, but the ideal of it is still what we all believe in. You know, you try to define any of these things, and it becomes hard to define, but the principles and general notions of them are things that we all kind of agree with, in general, at least as a society we do. So, these are the kinds of things that we want to think of, right? And so, when these things come into our way of thinking, into our values, it's very difficult when it seems like these values are not achievable, right? So take the notion of equality as a simple value, right? What does that mean? Well, what you're seeing being debated is really, at least if you go on Facebook, if you go on elsewhere from one group to the other, is really the notion of what does it mean to be equal? Does equal mean truly equal opportunity? Or does equal simply mean that you won't be treated, you know, different from someone who's exactly in the same position that you are in? You know what I mean? In other words, are we talking about if someone is extremely wealthy, should they have equal access to someone who is not extremely wealthy? Should something give you more opportunity than other things? And what are those things? What is acceptable, what is not? Is having money acceptable? Is your race acceptable? Is gender acceptable? Is your sexuality acceptable? Like, at what point do we start to say, no, this is not, and yes, this is, and this is where we find this argument and this debate. And if you're saying, no, it should be this way, well, that's just the debate, right? That's the argument. At what point? We do the same thing, move away from there, go back to democracy. We do the same thing with democracy, right? The notion of, like, what is a democracy? Should everybody have the right to vote? Yes. Well, what if you went to jail? Should you come back and have the right to vote? Yes, except some people do not. Do you lose the right to vote simply because you went to jail? Should you have to earn the right to vote? Should you do something in order to earn it? Or is it just being part of, born in this country give you the right to vote? What if you move from one place to another on election day? Do you have the right to vote on both places? Since technically in the morning you lived in that place and now in the afternoon you live in the other place. Sounds weird. Sounds like a trap, sounds like a ridiculous argument in many ways, but these are the debates right? The notion and the idea of it is still there, right? That part is still there. The question is, which one do you end up leaning towards? You know, as when you move to the section on socialization, this is where you start seeing these things come together. Culture, the theory, the methods in some ways, but the theory, the culture, and socialization really is when you start seeing these things come together, right? I point you to Thomas's theorem. Thomas's theorem is extremely important because Thomas's theorem is really what helps us to understand the significance of these things. Thomas's theorem stated that if people define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. What does that mean? Well, what that means is that if we all believe something is a certain way, then whatever consequences that come from that are going to be real. For a long time in the United States, there was the belief that people who were African American, black, that they were not as capable as whites. The consequences for that were real, right? It helped to solidify the purpose of slavery. It helped to solidify, and it was used as a way to disenfranchise African Americans from, getting the right to vote after the Civil War, particularly in the South, however, in the North as well. And so this is one of those situations where you actually see real consequences. If you want to make it, you're saying, oh, you're going for the easy thing. You're saying race, but they all have the right to vote. You can think of gender, right? Women are perceived as not being as capable as men. What does that mean? Well, does it mean that they are not capable physically? Does it mean that they're not capable mentally? Does it mean they're not capable emotionally? The truth is that as soon as you believe any one of those things, then the way that you treat someone who is identified as a woman is based on that very notion. Whether it's real or not, that is a real consequence. If you treat a woman as if she was not emotionally capable of doing something, then that is going to have an effect, and that is a real consequence. Consequence so real that it might prevent people from voting someone into an office, like the president's office, simply because that person is a woman. That's what this theorem does. It doesn't mean that that's real. It doesn't mean that women are not capable. It means that there are consequences in the notion that people feel if something is real, that's what's going to happen. And so this is how I want you guys to start thinking about sociology, is really thinking about how these things come together, how they mix together, how they, but doing it from a sociological lens, meaning you have to remove the emotional part. This is hard because we all feel the emotions, whether you're on one side or the other, whether you're like, but I want to be a cop, or my family member's a cop, or this person's a cop, or if you're thinking like all cops suck and this is you need to take a step back as a sociologist. The emotions are the emotions. Doesn't mean you ignore your emotions. It means you come to an understanding of what your emotions are. You come to an understanding of what is creating your emotions. This is, again, the sociological lens, the sociology promise, where you get to really understand a sense of yourself in your position within society, right? This is Mill's argument of what sociology can give you. It gives you an opportunity to see this as best you can, right? To wrap yourself around it, take a step back, understand your emotions, understand what's driving your emotions, not ignore them, understand them. Then, once you understand your emotions, once you understand what are the things that are, making you feel a certain way, then you start to look at how society is creating those things. What is it that brings these parts together? It gives you a sense of being able to identify what conditions could be improved, or where is it that we may be able to start focusing some of our efforts on in order to understand and bring about the society that we want. At a minimum, it gives you a sense of understanding the person that you are. You may not be a likable person. Sociological promise does not say that you're going to be a likable person. It just means that you get to understand. Hopefully, once you understand, you can then start thinking about, the logic and the reason that drives your emotion, right? To kind of understand that and to see if there is logic and reason in there. All right, there's a lot of stuff here, and I'm trying to, again, not fixate on my reasoning, my thinking behind this, my issues behind this because I think it's important to understand this as a class, and my point is to try and see the historical aspects of this. We will be talking about race in a few weeks, although I've opened up all the folders so that you can transition through it. I will probably talk a little bit more specifics about the history of this, particularly when it comes to modern riots and modern protests, and try to give you a better understanding of it from a sociological lens and what that means.